The San Francisco 49ers fired their special teams coordinator, maybe the worst kept secret that was going to happen.
On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks go to Salt Lake City and emerge victorious, but it was never easy.
Best news we could have possibly gotten on Tuesday.
Did you see how that Kentucky-Georgia game was called?
Michigan's size was way too much.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
After originally looking like he was going to be safe, Antonio Pierce is in fact out.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
As the coaching carousel continues to go round and round and round for the silver and black, where is it going to stop? Who knows? But they're now looking for a head coach once again. And my guy Raider Mike in Colorado actually sent me this by way of text on Tuesday and said, Q, the Raiders coaches since their last Super Bowl appearance, Bill Callahan, Norv Turner, Art Shell, Lane Kiffin, Tom Cable, Hugh Jackson, Dennis Allen, Tony Sperano, rest in peace, Jack Del Rio, John Gruden, Rich Bisaccia, Josh McDaniels, Antonio Pierce. Since the last time they were in the Super Bowl many, many moons ago, back in the early 2000s. And they've had 7 coaches in the last 13 years. Obviously, there is no consistency there, right? I think the Steelers have had, 3 head football coaches in the last, 40, 50 years? Something like that, some ridiculous number. Like, you've got to find a way to have some kind of consistency. And unfortunately, they just don't. So now Antonio Pierce is out. Many people are excited about that because, he just didn't get it done. Winning 4 games is not going to do it. He says it all the time. It's his words, not mine. It's a production-based business. If you don't produce, you won't be in business. So AP is no longer in business. So who's going to be up next? And, of course, we talked about it many times. The easy name to connect with the Raiders is Mike Vrabel because of his connections with Tom Brady. And Mike Vrabel's available, right? He's already taken interviews. He's already talked with the Jets. He's going to be talking with the Patriots on Thursday. And to be honest, I think this bad boy gets wrapped up for him coming up Thursday afternoon. By the time that interview gets over, I think you're going to get an announcement pretty quickly that, the Patriots have hired Mike Vrabel to be their next head football coach. That's just my gut feeling of what's going to happen. Maybe the Tom Brady effect can help put a full court press on him for the Raiders. We'll see. But the Patriots already interviewed Byron Leftwich. They've already interviewed Pep Hamilton. So those 2 head coaches right there, again, I hate to say it, I talked about it in segment number 1. They satisfied the Rooney Rule, so now they're free to hire whoever they want to. They can make that hire quick, fast, and in a hurry. And again, they're trying to get things done as quick as possible. Now, the one thing with the Raiders is even though I feel like they're behind the 8 ball, they're a little bit behind schedule because they waited to move on from Antonio Pierce. That tells me that they've been doing some back channeling. They've been doing some conversations. They've been reaching out. They've been looking to who's available and who would be interested. Again, I say it all the time, and I said it in segment number 1. I've never got a job that I applied for, right? All my radio jobs, podcasts, this job right here, someone reached out to me to gauge my interest. That's what you always do. Even in the position I'm in to be in charge of the radio station. If I was going to make a change before I do, I'd reach out to somebody that I know, somebody that I'm comfortable with, that I know knows how to do the job that I would expect them to do and say, hey, if I was going to make a change here in Vegas, what would the chances be that you'd want to come? And just throw it out there, right? And that's just how things happen. That's how you do the back channeling. And there's no doubt and not a bone in my body that believes that hasn't been going on. Again, there's no reason why it took 18 weeks to decide that they were going to move on from Antonio Pierce and a couple days. I feel like that there was a couple people that they're reaching out to, and there's been reports from folks like Josina Anderson and Albert Breer and others that, there's a couple of candidates that the Raiders have been looking at. Mike Vrabel is the easy one to connect the dots. And if you're going to bring in Mike Vrabel, at least he's got a good track record. Right? I mean, he went to the AFC Championship game. He went to the AFC wildcard game. He went to the AFC divisional game, all with the Tennessee Titans. And, he didn't win those games. I believe he's 2-3. Yeah, he is 2-3 overall in the playoffs, but he has above 500 record in his career as a head coach with the Tennessee Titans. And for all purposes, everyone's, conversation and all the research I've done on Vrabel, he's one sharp coach. He's one guy that knows all the rules. He knows little loopholes. There's a lot that he knows, and just a well-respected head football coach. So he's one of the guys that I would look at and say, okay, I can get on board with that. Because my biggest thing, even though there's names out there like Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator from Detroit, who's the hotshot offensive coordinator, he's never been a head football coach. I don't think that you should get a guy that doesn't have experience. You just had a guy with no experience in Antonio Pierce. I think you have to get a guy, and I said this about the Bears as well. When the Bears opened up their job right after Thanksgiving, when they fired Matt Eberflus, I was on the radio that day, and I said, what they need to do is they need to hire someone that's been there, done that. Not someone new that's trying to feel their way out and say, okay, this is how I think we'll do it. This is how, it's done when I played at this team, and this is how other coaches did it. Somebody that's been there, done that. Somebody that can walk in and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. This all stops now, and we're going to get to where we need to be, and this is how. And, oh, by the way, let's not forget, Raider Nation, they're in the AFC West. Andy Reid, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Sean Payton, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Jim Harbaugh, he'll be a Hall of Famer. Why am I saying that? Because the division is going to be tough for some years to come. Andy Reid doesn't look like he's going anywhere. Obviously, Mahomes isn't. Sean Payton and Bo Nix, they look fresh and ready to roll. And Jim Harbaugh, I mean, he could probably go on forever. And, of course, he's got Justin Herbert. So whoever's going to come in and compete, I don't believe needs to be someone that's a nobody. Someone that's just getting some experience because, well, they're a hotshot coordinator. Now, if that's what direction they go, okay, that's fine, right? But just understand what it's going to be and that it might take a little bit longer and there might be some more patience that's needed. So Ben Johnson, obviously he's a hotshot name, the offensive coordinator for the Lions. He's a guy that's going to be having a lot of interviews along this process. Aaron Glenn, same team. Lions, but he's a defensive coordinator. He put his best work on film on Sunday Night Football against the Minnesota Vikings when that defense was just, man, that defense, that just choked folks out. That choked out the Vikings. Sam Darnold didn't have an opportunity to breathe. He was blitzed on about 56% of his dropbacks. Even Justin Jefferson only had 50-something yards receiving. Shout out to Amik Robertson, who, by the way, held him to 3 catches on the night. He did a fantastic job. Former Raiders cornerback. Shout out to Amik. 5'9" Amik going up against Justin Jefferson, who arguably could be the number 1 wide receiver in the league. Right? So Aaron Glenn, he put his resume out there so everyone could see on Sunday Night Football. He's getting a lot of requests, so he's available. Another name, and I mentioned this a couple days ago, and it's been mentioned to me as well, Pete Carroll, former Seattle Seahawks head football coach. He's a veteran. He's a guy who's a Bob the Builder type guy. He likes to, be able to turn things around. He went to USC and turned things around, won a national championship there. He was doing NIL before NIL was a thing, but he still was able to win a national championship there. Obviously, a Super Bowl winner in Seattle, should have won 2, but they didn't hand the ball to Beast Mode. They decided to want to throw it. But you see what he was able to build there. My problem with Pete Carroll, and I had someone call me out on the radio on Tuesday and thought I was being biased to him because he was old. And I said, it's not that he was old. It's just the fact that he's going to have to bring someone in that's going to be able to develop a young quarterback, develop an offense. That's not proven. He's a defensive-minded guy, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. But we all know that the Raiders struggle the most offensively, so he's going to have to put together a really good staff, right? He likes to build, don't get me wrong, and he would love to compete with Harbaugh. That's for sure. He'd love to compete with Harbaugh twice a year. And, of course, Andy Reid and Sean Payton, he's not going to back down to them. That would be, a guy that's got skins on the wall, so I can get behind that, but he has to have a really good staff to go along with them. So I'm kind of lukewarm on Pete Carroll. Again, I like the guy. I love his energy. He's, 73 years old and has a ton of energy. I can appreciate that. He'll get everyone motivated. He'll get everyone rah-rah and ready to go. That's for sure. I'd be interested to see what staff he brings to the table. But he's a guy that I know my guy Vinny Bonsignore has floated out a few times. And as I say all the time, Vinny doesn't just grab a name, pull it out his backside, and throw it against the wall and hope it sticks. He just doesn't. He gets that from a place of he's hearing from somebody, whether it's inside the organization or around the league, people that he trusts and people that trust him. So Pete Carroll's definitely a name to pay attention to. Mike McCarthy, I threw that name out there the other day. He's under contract with the Cowboys until the 14th. The Bears requested an interview with him, and the Cowboys denied that. I think he's going to end up back in Big D. I think Jerry's going to give him a contract extension. But as I mentioned before, his new agent is Don Yee. Just saying, Don Yee has ties to Tom Brady. So I'm just going to throw it out there. I think that would probably be a super dark horse, but that's a name that could be available if the 14th comes around and Jerry Jones doesn't give Mike McCarthy a contract extension. Obviously, he's done some really good things, won a Lombardi there in Green Bay. A young name, Liam Cohen, offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. I know a lot of people are high on him. He's done a really good job in Tampa Bay. Again, my big concern is that he hasn't been there, done that. He's the offensive coordinator, and he hasn't even been the offensive coordinator there in Tampa Bay very long. So that's my concern there, but he is a hot shot name to look out for. You'll hear a lot of people throw that name out there. Go hire Liam Cohen. Go hire Liam Cohen. And he's done some really good things with Tampa Bay. I'm not mad at that. But how about this one with the Tampa Bay ties? How about Bruce Arians? What about Bruce Arians? I know Bruce Arians stepped down because he had some medical situations, and I know he's, a year younger than Pete Carroll. I believe he's 72, Pete Carroll 73. I like Bruce Arians a lot for every reason that I said about a veteran coach, a guy who's been there, done that, a guy that knows how to build it, but he's also, Raider Nation, a guy who's had success. Think about where he's gone. Even when he was at Temple in college, he had success there. But think about this. In Pittsburgh, when he was working with Big Ben, had a ton of success, right? Offensive coordinator, quarterback coach. Remember when he was in Indianapolis? He was working with Andrew Luck, and he filled in for Chuck Pagano when Chuck Pagano got hit with colon cancer, and he filled in as the interim. Had a lot of success there in Indianapolis. Then he went to the Arizona Cardinals. Remember Carson Palmer, after being the quarterback with the Raiders, going to Arizona and having a lot of success there? You know who the head coach was? Bruce Arians. And you want to talk about Tom Brady ties? Who did he win a Super Bowl with in Tampa Bay? Yeah, you got it. Tom Brady. So I could see that. And that wasn't my suggestion. That didn't come out the brain right here. That didn't come out this dome. That was actually my guy, Ryan Hogue, former Raiders wide receiver. He actually called into my radio show. He's always on Mondays and Fridays. He called in on Tuesday and said, hey, I got a name that I haven't heard anyone mention. How about Bruce Arians? And as soon as he said that, he started explaining why I cut him off. I was like, I love it. I love it. And the other reason that I love it is because he can start this process. He can start the process, and look what's going on in Tampa Bay now. He's in Tampa Bay. He had success, obviously, there, won a Super Bowl with Tom Brady. He also had success with Jameis Winston. And Jameis Winston was a turnover machine. Remember the year he went 30 for 30? He threw 30 touchdown passes and 30 interceptions? Yeah, Bruce Arians was the head coach, and they were a really good team, but they just needed a guy who didn't turn the rock over so much. So that's why they had to move on from Jameis Winston. But after he won that Super Bowl, what did he do? Coach another year and then decided to walk away and pass the sticks on to who's there now? Todd Bowles. I don't know why. I know I see Coach Bowles at the combine all the time. Like, hey, what's his name again? Yeah, that boy bad. No, anyway, Todd Bowles. I don't know how all of a sudden I forgot his name, but he passed the sticks on to him. He was the defensive coordinator and said he should be the guy. Byron Leftwich is a guy that also had success on the staff there with Tampa Bay. Remember, he was one of the former players that was on Bruce Arians' staff, so he could put together a really good staff. He can have if Byron Leftwich doesn't get a head coaching job or he doesn't get an OC job somewhere else, he can end up being the OC along with Bruce Arians. I could see that teaming up together. I like that right there. That's one that sign me up for that for being my 1A. So again, we'll just kind of throw that out there. Brian Flores' name is out there. I know he's got ties to the Patriots, obviously Tom Brady. I don't know if he really fits with what the Raiders do. I know a lot of people are kind of high on him. He's going to get some looks because of what he's done with the Vikings defense. But again, he's got to be able to bring someone in that can develop a quarterback. And you saw what happened in Miami with Tua. So I don't know if that would be a good thought and a good suggestion to have out there. But I know his name is floating around there as well. But again, that Bruce Arians name is one that I'm a big fan of. And I'll throw this name out here, not because I'm suggesting it, not because I'm pounding the table for it, not at all, but I know the name is out there, and that's John Gruden. John Gruden, that would be 3.0 if he were to come back. Again, it's not my suggestion, but it's been floated out there. There's teams that are interested in him, right? I know that the climate is a lot different now than it was when he had to step down because of the emails and everything else. I still don't think that the way that they came about it was right. What he said in those emails clearly was not right, but the way that they got after him wasn't right either. So, and we all know that Mark Davis is a big John Gruden fan. So I would say it's probably a really dark horse, opportunity. But I would say that there's a chance that he could be that guy that nobody's talking. Well, I don't want to say nobody because there are people talking about him. But I think a lot of people are like, yeah, his name is out there. He could be that guy. I don't think he'll be that guy.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
The San Francisco 49ers fired their special teams coordinator, maybe the worst kept secret that was going to happen.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We'll see if it's a happy new year for Brian Schneider, because the 49ers, they fired their special teams coordinator. I think a lot of people wanted this to happen, and we've talked about it a little bit on this show. You know, there are three phases to football, the three big phases. You got offense, defense, special teams. And everybody always wonders, who's the offensive coordinator going to be? Who's the defensive coordinator going to be? The special teams coordinator is just as important, or almost as important. And obviously as a 49ers saw, and I saw in the chat yesterday, as people are trying to find reasons as to, man, why did the 49ers lose? There were some people like, man, special teams, it was atrocious. And there may not be anything that Brian Schneider could do about your kicker getting a high ankle sprain. He comes back not healthy, missing a lot of kicks. Jake Moody, Wisnowski, he missed a lot of games. You know, he got hurt. I think not having him, not just as your punter, but also as your holder for your kicks, that can make a difference with some of those aspects of special teams. But I think just as a whole, outside of even the kickers, 49ers special teams unit, not very good. And it seems like special teams has kind of been an issue for the Niners. They've been trying to figure out different ways to kind of either work around it or fix it. Not sure exactly what the answer is, but for them right now, they feel like the answer is firing Brian Schneider.
Yeah, and that's the issue is you have the coordinator and then you allocate valuable draft capital to the two kickers and you think, okay, this will improve things. We'll have someone who's going to punt the ball down the field so no one will be able to have a chance to return it. And we're going to have a kicker that's going to be able to make 40 and 50-yard kicks. But the crux of the problem is just execution. And it always feels like anytime we're watching a football game with the 49ers in it, we can feel a fake punt coming, but they can't. And for every one time that they stop it, there's 4 or 5 other times where they don't. And it happened again in Arizona. It's a little bit strange because I think the discussion becomes, this is going to be your third special teams coordinator, but under Kyle Shanahan, and let's be frank, even before that, it felt like special teams would always fall by the wayside, right? I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the last time that a 49ers punt return was for a touchdown was Ted Ginn in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. Now, that's a long time ago. So this is before Kyle Shanahan, but during Kyle Shanahan's time, it does feel like special teams, for whatever reason, is just either something that they try to throw money at, which I mean by like draft capital and everything, instead of trying to figure out why it is that teams just can execute better on special teams and they can't do the little things. So I do think the coordinator thing was a little bit of a worst kept secret. It's just now who's the next one. And if that doesn't change next year, then what's the discussion after that?
Yeah, I think a big part of just being good on special teams is having people that are dedicated to being good special teamers, whether it is a returner like a Ted Ginn. Like, I don't think when the 49ers signed Ted Ginn, it was because he's going to be this amazing receiver. And although he did contribute as a receiver, his main contributions were as a returner for the 49ers. You know, back in those days, they had a guy by the name of Kasem Osgood, right? Osgood, he was a receiver. But where was he going to make his money? As a key contributor on special teams. There's a special teams player on the Dallas Cowboys right now that actually came from 49ers, Goodwin, I believe. He was a 6'4" guy, kind of went from receiver to defensive back. But most importantly, he could run. He was a high flyer, and he was a guy that was going to really contribute to special teams. I think the last time the 49ers were actually pretty good at special teams was probably when Raheem Mostert was a gunner. And he was really good running down there on punts, on kicks. So I think one thing that the 49ers could do, aside from hiring someone that maybe has a slightly different philosophy than what they got from Brian Schneider, but find like who's going to be your special teams ace? Who's going to be that guy on the special teams unit that you feel like, you know what, teams are going to have to really account for him, and he's going to make a difference. Because I think right now, whether it's as a gunner or a guy in the return game, the 49ers kind of missing that guy.
Yeah, for sure. And special teams ace is the best way to put it, like a Matthew Slater type, right? Like he's consistently in the Pro Bowl, all pro at that position. And it is funny that you bring up Raheem Mostert because that's exactly who I thought of. And funny enough, that was during the Chip Kelly time. So Chip Kelly kind of knew what Mostert could do. So yeah, it is interesting. I think the discussion is more now, what's going to happen with this new special teams coordinator? And then if it doesn't pan out, then when do we start to say, well, what's really going on, Kyle Shanahan, behind closed doors with the special teams? Are you paying attention to it at all? Do you really care, or are you just like, hey, we're gonna prioritize this and that, and that'll figure itself out? And I think the most frustrating part is if the 49ers were a net zero average special teams team this season, they probably would have won a few more games. And that's not even me asking them to be special. It's just asking them to be average and give you just nothing. But they gave away so many points based on special teams, whether it's missed kicks or, obviously returns or just, not downing the football. It's frustrating to watch professional football players look like they're out of position the entire time. And hopefully a coordinator change is going to change it. But if not, then we got to start asking Kyle about, hey, what are you guys prioritizing over there?
King Theo in the chat says Odom was supposed to be that. He's a Pro Bowl gunner, and that is someone that they did bring in for special teams unit, and not just him. There was Oren Burks as well. They brought him in to kind of be a special teams guy. Burks, by the way, it was just reported what he had, like 17 tackles in week 18 game. So not just contributing on special teams, but also as a linebacker as well, getting some extra time while some guys are sitting. Special teams, it's one of those right now. I'm a head coach. And, I got to hire a defensive coordinator, hire an offensive coordinator. And the one thing I haven't even addressed yet is special teams. And it's one of those most important units, especially in high school football, because high school football, man, that field position can flip really quick. If somebody just has a dynamic player on the other side, more times than not, it's just your best player. He's back there returning. That could hurt a squad. And it's crazy, even with me knowing that, it's still one of the things that I still have not addressed yet. And I'm like, well, we'll get there. We'll get to special teams. Let's get this office coordinating stuff and defensive coordinating stuff situated. I hope that's not the thought process of Kyle Shanahan. He has a lot more resources and a lot more options than I do. I have to find somebody that knows a little bit about special teams and kind of build off of that. He has guys that, truly want to be good as being the special teams coordinator, even if that's all that they do. So hopefully the 49ers, they really start to prioritize that even more. Whatever he's done and whatever he thought that this is enough as a special teams coordinator, more, whether it's the coach, whether it's the players, whatever you thought you've done and you thought that was enough, it clearly is not enough because this has been a unit that has consistently, I don't want to say failed the 49ers, but it's definitely been an issue. Do you foresee any other firings happen? A lot of people are looking at Nick Sorensen. They're like, okay, we haven't heard from him yet. You're seeing some of the coordinators around the league fired. Cincinnati Bengals defensive coordinator, he was fired. Some head coaches fired. Some offensive coordinators fired. But right now, Nick Sorensen looks like he still has his job. Is that something that worries you moving forward? Do you think Kyle Shanahan is like, you know what, let's build on this year? Yes, it wasn't great. It wasn't good at all. And a lot of people are really upset about the production the 49ers got defensively. But, hey, man, there's some injuries. I really like you. We're going to get it together. You're a first-time coordinator. Do you think they keep Nick Sorensen around, or do you say, nope, he'll be axed in the next few days?
I have it at 50-50, and here's why. Last season, when the 49ers were a top 10 overall defense in EPA per play under Steve Wilks, it was the worst kept secret that Steve Wilks was going to go, right? And they had a much better performing defense last season than they did this year. I think when you listen to everybody speak about Nick Sorensen, regardless of what people outside the building are saying about him, it's kind of glowing. Kyle says, I like what he's been doing. Nick Bosa, I'd like to run it back. Demo Lenore, I like what they did. Like, for someone who is a sure firing, they sure are saying a lot more nice things about him than they ever did when Steve Wilks was there. And that was a better defense last season, even if we were frustrated with that one. So I'm 50-50. I do believe that there is a little bit to the thought process of we can't go into this next season with another defensive coordinator regardless. But either way, whatever defensive coordinators brought in here, I don't think they're going to be allowed to revamp everything. And then the other thing, too, about the Sorensen discussion that I feel like is lost in translation is because the 49ers have been playing so long into the season, so late into the season, it's been hard for them to get into the saddle and talk to people because everybody starts doing business the day after they're eliminated. The 49ers were having a bye week. They were getting ready for the divisional, then the NFC Championship. And they called Belichick, and Belichick said no. They called and tried to get Spagnuolo. Spagnuolo said no. And then they ended up with Sorensen. So I wonder if the dynamic is, you know what? A lot of guys were hurt. We had our flashes. Look what happened when Greenlaw came back and when Hufanga was back and the defense looked a little bit better. I wonder if that sample size and the context around the season with the idea of we can't have another defensive coordinator going into the season overlaps any sort of, hey, we got to get rid of him and we got to get somebody else in here. So I'm 50-50. I think it can go either way. That's probably not an interesting answer, but I'm just talking about like the way they've been speaking about him, Croc. Like, again, last year with Wilkes, they're telling everybody that he's not going to be around regardless. And they made it to a few plays from winning the Super Bowl. And then on the flip side, this defense is underperformed, and yet they can't go out of their way without saying so many nice things about Sorensen. So I guess that's the way I'm looking at it, is just the way that they're speaking about him.
On today's show, the Atlanta Hawks go to Salt Lake City and emerge victorious, but it was never easy.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast.
A 124-121 victory on the road in Utah to snap a 3-game losing streak for Atlanta. It was never easy. They were up pretty decently big in the first half. 16 points was the largest lead for Atlanta on a night without Jalen Johnson. And as I've covered in depth, and Hawks fans definitely know this, that nothing is a given right now for the Hawks without Jalen Johnson, but they struggled pretty badly without him. But he didn't play in this game, and the Hawks were able to get a win on the road. That is the rosy, optimistic framing of this game. It's a road win. Yes, it's a bad opponent. That's definitely worth acknowledging at some point in the podcast, but it's a road win, and there's nothing easy about that in the NBA. In the second half, it was all incredibly close. In fact, the Hawks, after leading big in that first half, never led by more than 7 points in the second half. They trailed several times in the second half, and it was a 5-point game or less on both sides for the entire fourth quarter. And then down the stretch, Utah actually had a heroic shot from Colin Sexton that tied the game in the final seconds, except for Trae decided to walk it off in memorable, artistic fashion. Trae was certainly the biggest story of this game even before that, with a 2020 game, his third of the season. But the walk-off made that all irrelevant. So, no matter what happens in the NBA, you win a game, it matters. I will give you all the context, all the nuance, all the detail on this podcast. But broadly speaking, the Hawks needed to win this game. I am not one that would ever assign must win to any game in January of an NBA season, ever. And I would have told you that win or lose today. But it's a game where the Hawks probably needed to win. Like, they're on this road trip. You don't want to suddenly go, lose 4 games in a row, have a tough one coming up on Thursday as well. This is the quote unquote easier game on the West Coast trip, and they win it. So that's the broad takeaway from the night. But as far as how this game unfolded, it was a good offensive game for the Hawks. It wasn't an elite one. It wasn't unforgettable offensively, except for the game winner again by Trae. And his individual play was tremendous in this game, but they had a 123 offensive rating. Like, they were really, really efficient along the way. They were just okay inside the arc. They were 18 of 44 from 3, which is quite good for this Hawks team, 41% on pretty good volume. And the big thing is they had 35 assists and only 10 turnovers. And I sort of noticed in my quick preview on the show on Tuesday, sort of Monday into Tuesday, but the Jazz are the worst turnover differential team in the league. They turn the ball over a lot on offense and do not force a lot of turnovers defensively. And the Hawks didn't totally demolish them in that area, but they were +6 in turnover margin in this game. And that was not a small thing in sort of pulling off this victory. And really, the Hawks only really had one bad ball security quarter. The third quarter, it was a little bit of a hiccup there. But in the game, only 10 giveaways. That's an excellent, excellent figure after the Hawks have struggled so badly to protect the ball in recent days. They get to the line a lot in this one. They were kind of passive at times, but not too much to complain about offensively, other than the bench was a little bit spotty for most of the night. But they did get 4 threes out of the bench in the fourth quarter that were definitely big at the time. And it's kind of funny. The first half, the Hawks were just tremendous in the possession game. They didn't shoot it incredibly well before halftime, but they only had 2 turnovers, and they really got on the opposite glass as well. So they just won on the margins in that first half. In the second half, the margins kind of slipped, but they made more shots. They made more threes, and that kind of papered over things. I think they actually made 11 threes in the second half on a pretty good rate. So overall, like, Trae was the headliner, obviously, and we'll get into this more later on when I talk about individual players, but 24 points, 20 assists, and 2 turnovers for Trae. He was awesome in this one, but he wasn't alone. The Hawks offensively were really balanced. They had 7 guys in double figures, 8 guys with 9 points or more for Atlanta. Only Okongwu, of the 9 guys who played, scored fewer than 9 points for the Hawks. So a pretty good balanced game. Trae's making everybody look good with his passing, as he often does. And offensively, again, it wasn't perfect, but not too much to complain about on that end of the floor. Now, defensively, it was not particularly impressive, both in the eye test and in the stats. They had a 120 defensive rating in a game against a team that's not terrible offensively. They're better on offense than defense this year in Utah, but still. And the Jazz did make some shots. I'll say that. They actually shot 19 of 48 from three, even with a rough second half shooting for Utah. They were really hot early in this one. And Lauri Markkanen ends this game with 35 points on 24 shooting possessions, which is really good. And, the Hawks allowed 48 three-point attempts. That's actually just too many in general, too many open ones, I thought, for the Hawks defense on the perimeter. And Markkanen is a very good player. I don't think he's a superstar player, but he's a really good player. And if you watch him closely, he is a pure play finisher. What I mean is he doesn't really pass. He's not a creator for other people. He's not a huge creator like off the bounce. He is a great shooter who happens to be 6'11", 7 feet tall, and a good finisher around the rim when he needs to be. And that was evidence here. He had 35 points and 1 assist in this game. And that's the scouting report. That's not out of the ordinary for the Hawks to have seen this from Markkanen. And yeah, it's tough to guard him at his size. I think if Jalen had played, it would have been Jalen's matchup a lot of the night. So that's at least notable too. But the Hawks allowed him to get wherever he wanted to in this game far too often. And yeah, he made a lot of shots. But still, the Hawks just not quite good enough on the perimeter at times. I thought Hunter really struggled defensively in this game. Ricochet did fine, but not like a game-changing performance for him defensively. Then you throw in Bogey, you throw in Garrison Matthews. Like, they had some defensive issues along the way. And with Dyson being by far the best defender, Dyson is not really well-suited to guarding Lauri Markkanen. Like, you could put him on him, but it's not going to use Dyson's strengths. You need one of your bigger forwards to do this, and they didn't really have that guy in this game. So I thought Zach did the best job overall, but that was probably the biggest weakness individually defensively in this game. The strength on defense was actually at the rim. The Jazz end this game with 38 points in the paint. That's a really, really low number. They shot 44% on twos and only 47.8% at the rim. That is a very, very low number. So credit to Capella and Okongwu in particular, rim protecting in this game. I thought the centers were really good defensively most of the night. There were some hiccups in the fourth quarter. I thought Clint was not the best in the fourth necessarily, but before that, I thought they were both really good defensively in this game. Offensively, Okongwu had a night to forget, honestly. But defensively, the two of them combined for, I think it was 7 blocks in this one. They rebounded the ball well most of the night. And, just good defense at the point of attack. And, not the point of attack, at the back line. Point of attack, not so good in this game other than Dyson. As a team, the Hawks blocked 11 shots. So rim protection was not the issue. It was more of the perimeter stuff. And look, they navigated this one. Old pal Patty Mills has a season high 13 points off the bench for Utah. It was like that kind of night in some respects. And credit to the Jazz, they were actually pretty, I thought, versatile and like resilient to come back from being down big early on a team that's not going anywhere. They're well coached by Will Hardy. It was a physical game as well, which kind of probably favored them, I thought, overall. But look, one more time here before we sort of get into more of the details in this game. This is one of those nights where I always say on the podcast for a reason, it's not easy to win on the road, especially earlier in the season. Like, yeah, in April, some teams are just done and they might roll over for you. The Jazz played hard in this game, and you're on the road without Jalen. And the Hawks, I think, even including this game, especially before this game, the Hawks were still like minus 13 net rating with Jalen off the floor this year. Like, they're not a good team without Jalen. That's just kind of where they are right now. But to go on the road, get a win, Trae was awesome, and that's kind of where you leave this one. So we'll get into how it unfolded with more detail in a second. But a win is a win is a win was what I would say. Even if the Hawks had some frustrating moments, it wasn't the best coach game, I didn't think, from Quinn Snyder. Like, there's stuff to get to that I'll touch on later on. But hey, it's a win, and it's a skid busting victory for the Hawks as well.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Looking at the wild card round, the Vikings are slight favorites on the road against the Rams. They're falling hard to the Lions. The Vikings, they got to go to LA now as the 5 seed. Get Minnesota favored by 1.5. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Best news we could have possibly gotten on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers.
Daniel, well, after Rashawn Slater was a late scratch against the Raiders, we were all very, very concerned. Fortunately, Rashawn Slater made his way back to practice and is hopefully ready to go for Saturday because it is a big, big game. As we all know, it's one and done. Speaking of that, Coach Harbaugh, is he going to be more aggressive in these situations now that it's definitely one and done? There's no tomorrow. You got to go get it done. And the Chargers absolutely cannot overlook the Houston Texans.
Yeah, man, it's been making me feel pretty uncomfortable just how lopsided the analysis has been as far as the Chargers being such prohibitive favorites, but it's not going to be an easy game. But you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you can get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win or lose your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. David, I know you went to a dark place when Rashawn Slater was held out of the Raiders game in Week 18 due to knee discomfort while stretching. Then when Jim Harbaugh was asked about it, he said, we're going to get an MRI as soon as we possibly can, and also basically said it wasn't a move that happened out of abundance of caution. The doctor said he couldn't go, and he didn't go. So, I mean, it left us all like, man, well, you're feeling really good about this matchup and getting the 5 seed, but without Rashawn Slater, it changes a lot, and I think we saw the impact of that, especially early on in that game last week, and credit to the offensive line who bounced back. Joe Alt moving to the left side seamlessly. But you need Rashawn Slater in the playoffs. And so after hearing literally nothing until Tuesday and then finally hearing Jim Harbaugh say, hey, Rashawn Slater is going to be back at practice today. David, he missed the entire 2022 season almost and then ended up missing a playoff game where he was supposed to potentially come back the next week. And I felt terrible for him. So for me, if he's limited at practice, if there's any possible way for a super tough dude to get into this game, he's going to do it. And I think this is just gigantic news that dramatically changes the Chargers' chances in this game.
Well, and he's having an all-pro season, Daniel. He's been absolutely phenomenal as a pass protector and as a run blocker. He has been crucial to the success of the Chargers offense. And we got to put it into numbers here. The Texans have two guys that have combined for 23 sacks between them. Rashawn Slater has allowed 3 sacks all season long, and 2 of those came against the same team against Myles Garrett, which also it showed that Rashawn Slater wasn't right with those snaps because he just doesn't lose that badly. And oh, by the way, that's 3 sacks and 22 pressures in over 547 pass blocking snaps. So that is pure, unadulterated dominance from Rashawn Slater at the left tackle position. It is a absolutely imperative that he is out there and ready to go to protect Justin Herbert's blind side. Hats off to Joe Alt. He did a great job switching over to the left side, but now you have your 2 elite pass protectors back in business on both sides. Rashawn Slater on the left and Joe Alt on the right.
It just doesn't give you an obvious weakness at tackle, at least, right? That we know the interior has had their struggles, but to have, one tackle where you know that you can kind of try to attack that and you know that it's going to be a chink in the armor, to not have that because it's basically a pick your poison going up against Rashawn Slater and Joe Alt, who's also been absolutely fantastic. Like, having both of these guys feels like you can at least limit what the biggest strength of the Texans defense is in this game, and that is those 2 edge rushers, right? The Chargers' biggest stresses and their biggest weakness so far this year has been the interior. They have some guys on the interior that can definitely give the Chargers problems, but it's not like what they have on the outside, where if you don't have good tackles and you're going up against this pair of edge rushers, it's going to be a really, really long day. And I think it just also gives Justin Herbert the best chance to play his best, which is what you need in this playoffs, because we know if Justin Herbert gets banged up, he isn't always the same player, even if he goes to try and, tough it out there. So the fact that you have both of these guys going into this one and done matchup, as you put it, right? A game that you have to have, it just really, really changes how I feel about this game, because I would not be feeling great about it if he wasn't out there. And I do believe he's going to be playing for this team on Saturday unless there's some sort of regression this week. But the Chargers also, in other news, did open up the 21-day return window for wide receiver Simi Fehoko, who obviously is more of a special teams guy, more of a run blocking guy as far as what he brings to this offense. At the same time, definitely a good glue guy and someone that basically said publicly, David, that he was good to go. So it makes me think, hey, with Josh Palmer not practicing, with the kind of, the uncertainty around that, hey, he could be going back this week and be on the field on Saturday against the Texans.
Yeah, and Simi Fehoko was a guy that in the offseason and into training camp, did absolutely everything he could to be able to earn a spot. And into the preseason, he shined. He made all the plays that came his way, and he was able to really secure that kind of one of those last wide receiver spots.
Yeah.
And he unfortunately only got to play 8 games, 6 receptions on 16 targets for 106 yards, 17.7 yards per reception, which is great. But yeah, this is a guy who is definitely going to add an element as a run blocker. He's got great size, 6'3", 220 pounds, and he is a guy that enjoys this type of work. He enjoys the dirty work. He wants to get in on these plays. He wants to contribute in any way possible. And so getting this type of guy back, I think is just another bit of reinforcements for this Chargers offense.
Yeah, and I think especially with what the defense has on the Texans side of things, you're going to need somebody else to step up outside of Quentin Johnson, outside of Alain McConkey. They do have 2 good corners over there they're going to be matched up with. But that's going to leave a really good matchup for whoever that third guy is. I don't think it's going to be Simi necessarily, just because even when he was with the team still, the last few games he had 3 targets and 0 catches, so it wasn't like he was a huge part of the offense. But when he was making plays, they were big plays, and they were big plays down the field. But a 36% catch rate obviously is something that's pretty inefficient, and it would hope it would be a lot better if they are going to, want to target him, give him some of those chances down the sideline and show that he can convert on them. But it does bring us to this from Donald Rickert, who says, assuming that there's only one more player that can be brought back from IR, aside from Simi Fehoko, who we know could get activated, who would you choose realistically? And David, it is a Chargers mailbag, and this is a great first question to get into because the Chargers now have 1 activation left. You get 2 extra in the playoffs. We assume one of those is going to be Simi since they opened up the window on him. Picking that other guy is a little bit tough, though.
Yeah, there's really only one other guy in my mind that kind of makes any kind of sense, and that would be Asante Samuel Jr. And unfortunately, we haven't heard absolutely anything about his injury. About him potentially coming back, nothing. No whispers of any kind. Yeah. And the thing is I don't even know if I even want him to come back, which I think the reason why is he played 4 games and he had 4 missed tackles, and all of them were big missed tackles that led to big, massive plays. Cam Hart and Tarheeb Steele. Cam Hart came in, has played 11 games, has 2 missed tackles in 460 snaps. Tarheeb Steele, a couple more, 12 missed tackles in 785 snaps, but he brings 4 pass breakups and 4 interceptions to the table. So if you're going to take some of those chances, you better have the reward to go with those risks.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there's a few guys they could do it. That's just really the guys that we know aren't season-ending injuries, right? It's basically Brendan Rice, who we still haven't heard anything about, in the same kind of camp as Asante Samuel Jr., where it kind of just popped up out of nowhere, and we haven't heard anything about it since. Another guy's Jalen Reagor, right? Another dude who you've had some deep success with on this team. Hard to know. I think this is a broken hand, so potentially not a season-ending type of injury. You could also throw Eli Apple. Maybe David wants Eli Apple over Asante Samuel Jr. He was playing well when he had to suit up on short notice. So there's not a lot of options there, but I do think it does kind of just shine more light on how weird the Asante Samuel Jr. situation is, because even if you could have him, I still think it is a positive because it doesn't necessarily mean he's starting. He is a good coverage player at his best, and if you had these dime packages and things like that you wanted to put out there, he's a guy that you feel like could help you in those situations. I'd probably rather have him on the field than Jasir Taylor. So I think that would definitely be someone I would bring back. But there's just no inkling or any sort of news at any point that Jim Harbaugh's ever been asked about it, that he's given any inclination that he's going to be back on the field.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Did you see how that Kentucky-Georgia game was called?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Kentucky basketball loses to Georgia by 13 on the road. 82-69 is the final score. And ladies and gentlemen, if you look like me, Stevie Wonder in an officiating uniform, you could have officiated this game. It was one of the worst officiating performances that I have seen in my entire life. The calls that were simultaneously missed and the calls that were simultaneously made were so egregious at halftime. I immediately ran down to the store to get myself a pair of cheap sunglasses so that I could pull this bit off, to be honest with you. Guys, this was absolutely disgusting. Georgia, coming into this game, we knew they're a physical team. They have a lot of big men that are super talented that can dominate down low, grabbing boards. They dominate in the paint in terms of efficiency, shooting the basketball. Santos Cyril is a really, really good player. Asa Newell, 5-star freshman. They've got really good guys down low. The officiating crew allowed them to play however they wished. Santos Cyril was able to do literally whatever he wanted in the paint and outside the arc when he was guarding Brandon Garrison. You cannot put both hands on a player's hips or their forearm and push them out of the stance that they're in if they're on the three-point line looking to make a pass. You cannot do that. That is a foul, and the officiating crew did not call it at all tonight. Kentucky was allowed to be manhandled, and anytime Kentucky did anything that could have been ticky-tack or light, they called it over and over and over and over again. Almost every single call in this game that could have been 50-50 went against Kentucky. Almost every single call that could have been 80-20 that could have gone against Georgia went against Kentucky. This was absolutely pathetic. And you can sit here and tell me, sure, maybe Kentucky, could they have shot better? Yes. Could they have rebounded a little bit better? Absolutely. You cannot win a game like this with the way that it was being called tonight. It is the start and end of this conversation. You say Kentucky should have shot better. If they had allowed them or not allowed them to be as physical on Kentucky, maybe they could have gotten some cleaner looks. Well, you could have finished better at the rim. If they had called more fouls on Kentucky at the rim, then maybe Kentucky would have gotten to the free throw line and they would have been able to execute more points there. This is one of the worst we got jobbed officiating performances I have seen. This takes me back to, I believe it was either 2022 or the 2021 season where we played at LSU. Severe Wheeler got clobbered in that game. Almost nothing was called. Davion Mintz got clobbered in this game. Almost nothing in that game. Almost nothing was called. This is an egregious. It's an indictment on the way that the game is being called. You cannot play basketball like this. You cannot continue to play basketball like this. This is so disappointing. And I want to say, I'll say this. Georgia is a good team. They're a good team. I said it in the preview, and I'll say it again. This is a good team that was going to put up a dogfight one way or another. Some people online didn't see it that way. The reality of the situation is it's hard to win on the road, and a lot of it has to do with the way that the game is going to be called. Yes, it absolutely sucks. Yes, Kentucky got jobbed. I firmly believe they got jobbed, which we'll get into the numbers, but holy freaking cow. How are you supposed to respond if you're Kentucky? How are you supposed to play your game if you are being physically manhandled every single trip down the floor and they're calling almost nothing? Almost nothing. And you may look at it and say, okay, well, Georgia was called for 20 fouls. It took forever to get there. The third foul in the second half was called with like a little over 11 minutes to go. You cannot play basketball like this with the way that the game was called. It is just egregious. It is just absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to wear this I'm going to wear this official jersey until we find a game here that feels like it was called competently. The reality of the situation, again, it's hard to win on the road. It's hard to win on the road against a team that was 12-2. You don't just stumble upon 12-2. Georgia is a good team. They've got a very good front court. Very good front court. But they were not officiated properly tonight. Frankly, if I were Georgia, and I realized 5 minutes into this game, hey, they're going to let us do whatever we want, I would have called the same game. If I were Mike White, I would have said, go in there, throw elbows, hand check everybody, and throw people on the ground for rebounds whenever you're going for a rebound and make them call it differently. I would have done the exact same thing. Unfortunately, you're not going to get that benefit if you're Kentucky and you're playing on the road. That's just part of it. Something else I want to point out here real quick, that's also the case for everybody else in the SEC. Every other team in the SEC is going to suffer from this. It is going to be a dogfight for every single opponent that wants to travel on the road and try and play semi-competent basketball. It's going to be a free throw contest if the home team wants to make it one. This, again, ridiculous. Then the problem is there's nothing that you can do about it. Nothing you can do about it. If you want to try and play more physical, like Kentucky did at different points, you'll get called for fouls. If you want to try and maybe let things go, you're going to give up easy buckets. It's just part of it. It's just the reality. You need to buckle up now. If you are a Kentucky fan listening to this, the reality is, and I keep saying reality, right? Buckle up, sober up. It's going to be a bumpy ride until tournament time. Mark Pope has put together a team that is capable of getting hot and making a run in the SEC and NCAA tournaments. It's going to require different officiating, and it's going to require the team to just start shooting better at some point this season. Full stop. Brian, the YouTube comments, if you're watching this live, by the way, thank you so much. If you're listening on the postcast, we are currently live on YouTube recording this. Brian says, Andrew Carr getting choke slammed to the ground with hands fully around his neck confirms these refs should be suspended. Do they have money on this game or what? I believe the refs are unionized, if I'm not mistaken, so we can't do anything about this. But yeah, you want to go back and look. Carr was going for a rebound. He got choke slammed onto the ground. They didn't call anything. They did not call anything. The response to anybody that says Kentucky should have done X, Y, or Z in this game better. It's simple. Yes, they could have done better. They could have absolutely done better in multiple aspects of the game. It is so difficult, nearly impossible to do better it's nearly impossible to do better with the way that this game was called. It is nearly impossible. There's nothing you can do about it. The flagrant on Carr didn't make sense. It was a weak call. Can't blame officiating for losses. You guys can't play well away from Rupp. Again, I want to reiterate what I said earlier. Nobody's going to play well away from home this season. Maybe outside of Auburn. I've not taken a look at that Auburn-Texas score. Nobody in this conference is going to play well on the road this season. Mark it down. Throw the freaking sticker up, for crying out loud. It is not going to happen. The games are going to be called differently, and you just have to accept it. Nobody's going to play well. Case in point, the number one team in the nation going on the road to Florida tonight and getting 30-pieced. They didn't score 50. Tennessee didn't score 50. They got manhandled, and they were allowed to do so. Florida was allowed to do so. It's part of it.
From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Looking at the wild card round, the Vikings are slight favorites on the road against the Rams. They're falling hard to the Lions. The Vikings, they got to go to LA now as the 5 seed. Get Minnesota favored by 1.5. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Michigan's size was way too much.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins.
Oh boy, that's back-to-back losses for UCLA. They're now 11-4 on the year, losing to Michigan, who improves to 12-3, 4-0 in Big Ten plays. The Bruins fall to 2-2 after a 2-0 start back in December. Since the New Year's come after the Bruins took down Gonzaga, they've beaten Arizona in neutral court, should have beaten North Carolina, and here they are with back-to-back humbling defeats in very different ways. The Bruins were introduced to the Big Ten life with thousands, tens of thousands of screaming fans in Lincoln, and the Bruins shot like it, and they played like it. And then they come back home, where the energy is clearly just not the same, although they brought it at most parts in Paul Pavilion. UCLA, they just got cooked. They lost 94-75. Now, this game, you look at it and you're like, okay, Zach, you're telling me that Michigan went to UCLA and beat them by 20 and scored 94 points in Los Angeles? Yeah. And you're like, well, what are we doing here? Is this UCLA team just a fraud? Well, Michigan is arguably one of the worst mismatches for UCLA. One of the worst mismatches. When you've got like a 7-foot point guard, a 7-foot center who can make his free throws, jumpers, hit a three, and put in 36, that is just Mick Cronin's living nightmare with the roster he has constructed this year. That is one of the worst matchups. I knew Michigan would be a problem. I hoped UCLA and thought maybe they could beat Nebraska, but Eric Daly Jr. was unavailable. I'm not sure how much William Kyle could have made a difference in that game. No, everybody, including a banged-up Sky Clark, was available for this game today for UCLA. They got down 18 in the first half, right? UCLA makes the run, have full control and momentum, and they lose this game by 20. I'm not sure you can think of many games, especially in college basketball. NBA is a little different. Teams get hot. You can get out of control real fast. In college basketball, there's not times where you're down 20 in the first half, you lose the game by 20, and yet you still feel like UCLA did some wrong thing, did some poor management when it came to subs and handling moments of the game where they had control, momentum, and the lead with less than half of the second half to play. And they lose this game by 20. Because there was that. They had Wolf in foul trouble. They had Golden in foul trouble. Heck, they had Jones in foul trouble. And one of Michigan's, I believe, third leading scorers didn't even play in this game, and they still put up 94. Well, when Trae Donaldson absolutely got on fire in that stretch, hitting 6 trays, literally living up to his name, the Bruins had no answers. When Michigan's going to go 15 of 28 from 3 and also score just as many points in the paint, or just dominating the points and the rebounding, I don't know what UCLA can do when they're severely undersized. He clearly doesn't trust Mata. And when UCLA had that stretch, Wolf went to the bench with 4 fouls. Golden went to the bench with 4 fouls. He had a Mara in the game shooting free throws to get it to like 6. He had all the momentum. UCLA had to lead, and then Wolf went to the bench. And then they hit a couple of threes. Then they're down 6 with the chance to go big on Michigan. So they had to lead. Wolf gets in foul trouble. The Bruins collapse for a few minutes there. Then they get Golden out of the game. Martin, I believe, hits 2 free throws to get to 6 points, get within 6 points of Michigan. And then next you know, the 7-3 Spaniard, when Michigan has no size on the floor, which is one of their that's their bread and butter. When they got a dude who can go one-hand passing, 6 assists, 8 rebounds, splash a couple of threes to the other big man, I don't know what you can do. They had Mata in there with Bilodeau in foul trouble, mind you, to maybe shore up the post. He puts in Kyle, and the first thing that happens, I'm not going to really blame Kyle for this, but the first thing that happens is Donaldson just splashes a 3 in his face and then just goes literally like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? Just going crazy with his 3-point shooting. And the Bruins have clearly no answer for that. I was thinking the first half, Michigan's going to win the national championship. That's how legitimate I thought Michigan was compared to this mismatch. I don't think UCLA is worse from this game. I just think if there's a team in the country that could match up really well, head west, beat UCLA, who, mind you, did have to travel and come back. Michigan's been on the West Coast for a full week now. That the Bruins, this is a terrible mismatch. This is still a Michigan team that on average turns it over 15 times. So they turned it over 16 times. The Bruins turned it into 20 points off turnovers. What's a funny stat, though, UCLA turned it over 6 times in this game. There's 2 telling stats in this game. UCLA turned it over 6 times. So if you think about poor decision-making offensively when it comes to just giving up the basketball, the Bruins didn't necessarily do that. They were just hindered because of Michigan's size all around. That's how Dusty May has created this roster. a really good one-year turnaround after they were horrible last year. Michigan team that was losing to Long Beach State last year at home. They were losing to all these teams at home, and now they're completely different with a new staff, new roster. So they forced only 6 UCLA turnovers, okay? They produced 12 points off those turnovers. So basically, every time Michigan got a turnover, they're getting a bucket out of that. They're getting a bucket. UCLA had 20 points off 16 turnovers. That's a really good number for what UCLA needed to do in this game and how they had to come back and claw and scrap and claw and fight back in this game. So that meant in a category where UCLA was plus 10 in turnovers, generally you want about 1 point per turnover, right? 6 points for 6 points. You know, that's a really good marker Michigan had. UCLA should have been at least plus 15 plus points off turnovers. They're only plus 8 in a stat that they practically dominated. Michigan still kept it close. Another thing, you're like, UCLA shot 34 free throws. Maybe Michigan fans are up in arms about that, right? And you're like, well, that's not a thing. No, Michigan teams that play Michigan, on average, they shoot like 16 free throws against Michigan. Now, Michigan, because they're so big, will foul you a lot and also shoot a lot of free throws. So in this game, Michigan went 15 of 21. UCLA went 23 of 34. I don't know what's worse, but I think one of the things I despise most about this team is UCLA shooting free throws. It is just so bad. You knew it was bad when Stefanovic had an answer with an and one of his 2 made buckets in this game. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Stefanovic missed his first free throw all season. That's when you knew the Bruins were down bad in this game. When the guy you could trust the most, and you know, he's going to miss 1 free throw, but the guy who's been making all his free throws misses one on an and one that maybe can answer a Michigan bucket. No, he missed a free throw. UCLA missed 11 free throws. And I was thinking, to beat Michigan, they need to get cold from 3, which they did, and they still made more than 50%. You needed to turn them over. They did. Not enough, not nearly enough to balance out the size mismatch for UCLA. With what they average forced turnovers-wise, that's generally less than what the Bruins force. Michigan was on their season's average and how much they turn the basketball over on offense. And the Bruins, you have to capitalize at the free throw line. If they make free throws in certain stages of those games, that changes it, right? And I look at these numbers, they're not shooting horribly in certain guys. Like Johnson shot 10 free throws. He made 7 of 10. Sebastian Mack, 5 of 7. But these guys collectively, when you've missed 11, you could hear the groans on the broadcast. You could hear the groans. You're just like, oh, every time Golden touched the ball, oh no, here's a bucket. And then UCLA missing free throws, and 2 of 20 from downtown is not going to cut it. Every time UCLA has beaten a good team, they have shot the ball well, they have played with the lead, they have lost it, and it's great to see they had the fight. I don't know how you can't love this team with the fight that they have to get back in it. It just wasn't enough.